So I've had to do this in two parts, guys. Kind of a little bit of a little more that I can chew. A couple more slides to look at real quick here. One of the things with the 50s, with all the TV, all those kind of things, you started seeing things be a lot more conforming. So basically, the idea was everyone was the same. The idea that you would dress very much the same. If you were at a certain job, you dress a certain way, as you see in our picture here. Your family had to be a certain way, okay? Mom, dad, two kids, that kind of thing. The man being the wage earner, the woman being the homemaker. If you did things differently, people started questioning stuff. If it was right, wrong, whatever. Make sure we all want the same thing, the American dream. We all need the house, the car, the white picket fence, the job we ever dreamed, those kind of deals. Even in terms of work, it was very conforming. Look at the picture down here. Everything all looks the same all the way down. And you're supposed to be all loyal to the job. You think the same, dress the same, don't really be different. You have to meet the line and meet what is expected of you. That was a big part of the 50s, and they showed this through TV. I mean, TV showed how things were supposed to be. They showed the ideal idea. Was everybody conforming to this? Of course not. But it's kind of what the expectation was that you were supposed to do was going to be. There were rebels, okay? The biggest rebels were called the beatniks. You kind of see a picture of the beatniks here on the picture. Kind of known for, reading poetry, playing bongos, at least in some of the more stereotypical version of beatniks. But they would dress a little bit different, whereas, the business class of the 50s would enjoy drinking after work. They might have used drugs like marijuana, that kind of stuff. They dressed differently, fought against this corporate culture, conforming culture, just kind of did their own thing, and were different that way. And a couple different people are kind of the writers of the beatnik culture. Allen Ginsberg was a big one. He wrote a poem called Howl and performed about just being different, being your own person. Jack Kerouac, probably one of my favorites, Jack Kerouac, wrote a book called On the Road. Basically wrote a story about traveling around the world trying to find who you are and trying to find what makes you happy. And not be conforming. And kind of says, in the book, they travel around working different jobs that may not be, the idea of company loyalty or the idea of doing what the American dream type thing. The guy in the book leaves his wife and he gets his girlfriend pregnant in another state and those kind of things. It's very much shows the different life of the 50s. I mean, things that weren't conforming, things like minority life, things about people who were homosexual. Those kind of things came around that would normally be like not okay, not considered not okay in the conforming 50s. He shows in his book. Religion came back too. Once we revived religion, with the idea of fear of attack and nuclear war, Cold War, people started thinking higher power. Religion started really coming back to the 50s, and people started being more conservative in terms of the religion. In fact, you see religion really kind of coming to the government in the 50s with two big things. The line "under God" is actually added to the Pledge of Allegiance during the 50s. Never existed in the pledge before the 50s. They added "one nation under God" to the pledge. Also, on all money, you find "in God we trust." If you find a coin from before the 50s, it does not say "in God we trust" on it. And so you kind of see kind of more public version of religion in the 50s. TV evangelists were part of it. Evangelists were preachers who preached to big crowds, and they actually used that new medium of TV. And we were preaching on TV. The Reverend Billy Graham in the picture being the biggest one who would, they have TV shows where they could preach to everybody and use that new medium of television. Now, not everybody during this time was doing awesome. There were poor people in the 50s, and they called them the hidden poor. I mean, about 20% of people, 1 out of every 5, were poor, but they're mostly in 1 or 2 places. The inner cities, where a lot of people had left for the suburbs, and the only people left in the middle were minorities usually, and rural America. And 10% of the country's population was poor, so half of that 20% that were poor were under the age of 18. So a lot of kids, because of that baby boom, were very, very poor or old. For elderly people, they really, they had longer lives with new medicine, penicillin, all that kind of stuff. But, thing is, the idea of retirement funds really didn't exist yet. Yeah, Social Security was starting up for the New Deal, but a lot of times older people didn't have money to survive. They still have to move in with their kids, those kind of deals. A book by Michael Harrington called The Other America was published in the early 60s, really brought attention to the inner city poor. Rural poor, people kind of knew what rural poor, like especially down south, in the cotton belt, that kind of area. But in their cities, like you see the top picture there, it was really about kind of the minorities that were there. That white flight happened, and because of that white flight that happened, all the money pulled out of those cities. There wasn't a lot of taxes coming in, so not a lot of money got put in the cities. The government kind of quit taking care of stuff, quit fixing up stuff, and you already start seeing all the things kind of fall apart. No jobs, bad housing, all those problems. Essentially you get this cycle of poverty happening. If you're born in this cycle, you can't move out of the city. You don't have enough money to move out of the city. You're stuck there, and your kids will be stuck there. And really start depending on the government aid. They call them they call these areas and cities the projects for the government housing, the tenements made for housing the poor. And so you start seeing kind of people be stuck in this process in the inner cities. For Hispanics, actually saw immigration increase in the 50s. The Bracero program had brought people in the 40s, and a lot of Braceros who were supposed to go back to Mexico just kind of stayed. But they're big time taking advantage by their employers. I mean, they're getting a lot less pay, worse jobs, those kind of things by their employers, really taking advantage of in terms of hours and all that. In fact, the government wanted to fix this, and it was something called Operation Wetback. Wetback being a really bad slur for Hispanics, and they actually officially called this public name. And it was basically a big process where a lot of Hispanics were rounded up and deported, even the worst in some cases, and deported. And so for in a 3-year period, over 3 million Mexicans were deported to Mexico. Native Americans also had a tough time. The government started something called termination policy. Termination policy officially ended the Native American reservations. So remember, the reservations were kind of like, this is Native American land, and termination policy got rid of those. And the reservation, it was reserved, meaning that land was reserved for the Native American tribe. It was now gone. And that meant that all that land that was there was open for this new urban spread we have. And so you actually saw a lot of Native American land up for sale for whether it be timbering or mining or farming or even expansion of cities. And people snapped up all kinds of land for super, super cheap. And that land was supposed to be set aside for the Native Americans. And so a lot of Native Americans are very, very unhappy with this policy. And we see a lot of resistance to the termination policy by Native Americans going forward here. Doing our slides, guys. Young people of 50s, and we'll do more research on this. But with a lot of money being around the middle class, teenagers had money, teenagers had freedom, especially with the idea of cars. And really, for teenagers, it was really a time where the modern day teenager is born. People could hang out, enjoy life, spend money, have fun. It wasn't just about preparing for a job. It was actually kind of living teenage life. I mean, obviously there's still some fear of Cold War, all that kind of stuff, but it's a lot better than it was, prior to that. Rock and roll becomes the big music. Elvis Presley, other artists took, black music like the blues and jazz and added their own little spin to it and created what is now rock and roll. So you have like Elvis Presley, Buddy Holly, the Big Bopper, all these kind of guys bring this idea in. TV's new entertainment. I mean, everybody had their shows, the idea of sitcom or situation comedies where, you have families and that kind of things, different situations that are funny. It became the entertainment. Everyone had their favorite shows they had to watch at a certain time. But I think even TV showed the ideal life, kind of the American dream family, that conforming family versus really accurate what families really were. I mean, you would never see anything you see on TV today. You never see homosexual couples. You always saw, man and wife. You always saw, perfect family. It's actually very, very conservative on TV. In fact, you just saw, they showed men and women on TV sleeping in separate beds and twin beds because unless they were actually married on TV. So Lucille Ball here, Desi Arnaz on the I Love Lucy show, they were married in real life, so they could actually be shown in the same bed, or even having this one bed on TV. If they weren't actually married in real life, they couldn't do that. And so really, you kind of saw this ideal life versus the real life. We finished the 50s off with the election of 1960. And so we see John F. Kennedy from Massachusetts square off against Richard Nixon from California. Both of them were very popular. Both of them were war heroes in World War II. And in the end, Kennedy's elected in 1960. But the election in 1960 was really more about a lot of things. Okay, it's Catholic Kennedy versus a Protestant Nixon. Actually, Kennedy becomes the first ever Christian Catholic president. You have Kennedy from a very elite family out east to the middle class Nixon from California. You have the idea of style and image versus experience. Nixon's a very, very experienced politician. Kennedy was a first-term senator, but he was, young. He was idealistic. He was attractive, good-looking, all those kind of things. And it's time, first time TV really plays a role in the presidency. The first time that the presidential debate was on TV. So you kind of see, you have Kennedy here, Nixon here. And at the time, Kennedy decided to wear makeup for the TV debate. Before Nixon's like, I'm not wearing makeup. Nixon had been in a car accident before that. He'd been sick, and he looked pretty terrible. He looked very pale, and people are like, well, Nixon looks better, and maybe not just that, but I mean, one that kind of played a factor in terms of him being elected, him being the youngest president ever elected. It was all about image versus just the ideas. Very, very close election. Many people think fraud may have been involved, and a lot of questions raised about it. So there is